Our next speaker is Chen-Pan Yeang from the University of Toronto. And you gave a talk here about a decade ago.
Yes.
I remember. Welcome back.
Thank you. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank Diana and Sylvie and the individuals who organized this fantastic events. And I would also like to congratulate Jed for his 70th birthday. So today I don't have any concrete research results to present, nor will I give any in-depth methodological analysis. Instead, I will just talk a little bit about or share a little bit about my personal memory. Okay, so let me get started. So I came to know Jed in 1997 when I was a graduate student in electrical engineering at MIT. I was interested in the history of science and followed Hassel Chan's recommendation to take a course with Jed. I still remember the moment when I walked into his office. Well, by this time, I had already visited several MIT engineering professors' offices and workspaces, and they all look pretty similar. A large desk with big computer screen blocking the guest's eyesight, a few shelves piled with periodicals, file cabinets, an equation-filled whiteboard smelling of markers, and occasionally an optical table, circuit boards, or a mechanical prototype. So that was the workspace I was more familiar with in terms of a professor's office. And these offices were located either in a bunker-style building of World War II legacy or in one of the 1960s brutalist architecture. Jed's office as the director of the Dibner Institute was different game. Tall ceiling to floor bookcases stacked with antiquated tomes and hardcover volumes. Big window overlooking the Charles River. A sketch of a man in contemplation who was Max Planck, as I later learned. And that was hanging on one of the walls. I resist the temptations of invoking some images from, say, Umberto Eco's novel, nor did I to agree with the senior colleague's comments and call this space a banker's office. But this room where I saw Jed for the first time did emanate a distinct sense of aura. And this was the place where I took not one, but 4 courses with Jed over the following years. He introduced me to the worlds of Newtonian theory of light, analytical mechanics, the debate surrounding the method of fluxions and differential calculus, chemical atomism, Maxwellian electrodynamics, Fresnelian optics, Carnot cycle, adiabatic expansion, and the propagation of sounds, and quantum hypothesis for blackbody radiation, and a lot more. And of course, he talked enthusiastically about his Heinrich Hertz's radio wave experiment, on which he had just written a book. We spent time trying to figure out puzzling passages from Newton's Principia in Optics, Huygens' Horologium Oscillatorium, articles in Laplace's Oeuvre, or Sommerfeld's Atombau. Most of these original texts were really readily available in his bookshelf. Once in a while, however, he would descend to the Dibner Institute's depository, retrieve a rare book, and bring back to his office. Some of these books most likely had never been properly read, since Jed had to use a paper knife to cut open the folded layers. But Jed and I were not the only head-scratching individuals in that Dibner Institute's office. Baba Ashrafi was another frequent student. Teresa Levitt participated in the reading course for a semester. From time to time, guests and visitors, including George Smith, Edith Sella, Alan Franklin, and Ursula Klein, joined the discussion. It was not until much later that I became aware of the uniqueness of that experience for neophytes studying the history of science. But the influence was prompt. Right after obtaining a degree in electrical engineering in 1999, I started to pursue a PhD in the history of science and technology at MIT Science, Technology, and Society Program, or STS. After that, my apprenticeship with Jet entered into a new page. He became my dissertation supervisor. I received more and more advice from him about my research on long-distance radio wave propagation, as well as my professional development, writing, and career planning. We had frank conversations about situations of the academic fields in history of science and technology. I also learned one other new things from him during these periods, which is the replications of historical experiment that this session is about. Well, Jet co-taught a lab course with Larry Bucciarelli at MIT for MIT undergraduate students at the Edgerton Laboratory above the Infinite Corridor of the Tech Dome building. I was the only humanities graduate student in the room. We were tasked with replicating a few famous past physics experiments. And we started with Ptolemy's test of refraction, when light travels from air to water. But we spent more time over the semester struggling with Coulomb's measurements of electrostatic force, which Al just spent time talking about. Well, if reading Coulomb's terse and ambiguous descriptions of his experimental procedure and results, and building and calibrating his torsion balance and glass chamber were already challenging enough, trying to obtain data with any remote resemblance to his numbers was even more difficult. In the end, none of the students group were able to reproduce Coulomb's numerical results. So that was a prelude of L's story. And a successful replication did not come up until L carefully investigated that in Caltech with Jet guidance many years later. Yet this coursework was an eye-opening experience for me. While most scholars I had studied promulgated the examinations of textual sources as the method of doing historical research, Jet and Larry taught me the manipulations of objects and materials while experimental replication could be an important methods and elements of historical research too. Today, labs for history of science and technology are proliferating in North America and Western Europe. And prominent historians employed experimental replication as a means to examine the tacit knowledge, make sense of esoteric scientific and technical texts, and explore the corresponding science. And philosophers and scientists talk about this crisis of replication. Making and doing expand the horizons of STS scholarship. To me, what we did in the Edgerton lab was an early rehearsal for many of these exciting current developments today. In 2001, Jet moved from MIT to Caltech's divisions of humanities and social sciences, an academic unit without a doctoral program in humanities. So that means he would no longer accept new graduate students, and I thus became his last PhD supervisee. There's an old description of a particular kind of students in Chinese called 关门弟子, and that means literally closed-door disciple. The phrase refers to the last protege admitted by a Buddhist or Taoist guru, a Confucian savant, or a Kung Fu master, when before he metaphorically closed the door of his academy and retired. In many Chinese lessons, this closed-door disciple carried the torch of the master's teaching, refined the spiritual, scholarly, or technical legacies of his school, or spread them to the world, to the wide world. I'm certainly not Jed's closed-door disciple in any of those senses. He has trained numerous scholars and researchers who have made much more fantastic contribution to the history of science and technology than mine. But in retrospect, I do think that I've learned a thing or two from this Bakwa school, and if there's such a thing. That school is characterized not only by the wealth of knowledge in the history of physics and mathematics, by the preoccupation with technicality, the preference for the internal approach, a methodological hallmark that Harry Collins had labeled the technical history of science, or the writing of papers and books filled with equations, diagrams, and descriptions of instruments and procedures. Rather, the Bakwa school to me is the embodiment of an attitude toward historical scholarship. The attitude of paying supreme attention to details, of conducting research with extreme caution and but bold hypothesis, of being driven and intrigued by the burning curiosities about what exactly happened, how it happened, and why it happened in this and not that way, and of letting facts and evidence speak for themselves, but insist on finding reasonable interpretations. As a historian, I've taken these lessons to heart. In the spring and summer of 2002, Jed arranged a visitor position for me at Caltech in order that we might work together on my dissertation. When I saw him in Pasadena, he looked happy and relaxed. Although he no longer had the Dibner director's office overlooking the Charles River, his spacious two-room suite next to the Einstein Paper Project Villa had an equally magnificent view of a Caltech garden. The California sunshine and Diana's company cheered him up. Perhaps this was the environment that encouraged him to explore new research directions. In the following years, he ventured from the familiar terrains in the history of physics and mathematics and into the origins of antiquity studies in Europe from the 17th to the 19th century. With Diane Greco-Josephowitz and Modi Feingold, he wrote books on a controversy over the interpretations of an ancient Egyptian zodiac in Napoleon, France, Newton's bewildering inquiries on biblical chronology, and the deciphering of Egyptian hieroglyphs by Thomas Yeang and Jean-François Champollion. This change of direction from wave optics and Maxwellian electrodynamics to Egyptian hieroglyph and biblical chronology may appear no less drastic than switching genre from Stephen Hawking to Dan Brown. But underlying such a dramatic change of themes, one can see a strong continuity that characterized the aforementioned Bakwa school, an incessant scrutiny of all available primary sources in print and in archives, and integrations of texts with other types of historical materials, and extremely careful examinations of the data that does not shy away from quantitative analysis, and always the presence of an enticing, firm, and thought-provocative story. Although I know close to nothing about these topics Jed had been working on over the past 18 years, I observed with awe and admiration his successful launches of book after book. Recently, Jed returned to his old pal Heinrich Hertz. After more than a decade of work on the origins of antiquity studies, he decided to write a sequel to his 1994 book on Hertz's discovery of radio waves, a project he planned while at the Dibner Institute. I have the honor of being his collaborator for this project, and we have already had some fun working on this undertaking. Watching together the bright and bustling Spargate device in operation in the basements of the Sidney Smith Building at the University of Toronto, and also at Paolo Breni's impressive instrument museum at Fondazione in Florence. We have also been exchanging MATLAB codes for calculating electromagnetic scattering from interesting boundary conditions, etc. I appreciate the opportunity to express my gratitude and my appreciations of him as the mentor and model scholar at the celebrations of his 70th birthday, and I look forward to collaborating with him on this exciting new project. Thank you very much.